Hi, welcome back to China Manufacturing Decoded. Renaud's here with me. I'm Adrian from the team. Renaud, hi.
Hey. Hi, Adrian, and hi, everybody.
So how's it going, Renaud? You good?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, in France for a few weeks, catching up on a few things and going to go around, meet with a few clients and so on. We'll be back and go through the quarantine later in August.
Oh, yeah.
So, it's fine.
Yeah, well, let's hope it's pretty smooth. Not as bad as last year, I think.
Oh, yeah. Well, but let's see. Things are always moving. We never know really, what it's going to be like this time.
Absolutely. Well, that's good anyway. It's good to know. So I'm glad to be back on. After last week, you had Clive on again and talking about the impact of the EU Ecodesign regulation. And that was kind of part 2 of that. That's a really helpful topic.
Yeah, right. The first one, episode 110, was about what is that train coming in my direction, So if you sell products in the EU, wherever they are made, you're going to have to be careful with that new regulation. It's going to come into play immediately. It's a regulation, not a directive, and it's going to add new requirements, and there are certain sectors that would be under the light immediately, such as textile and especially fast fashion and these kind of things, and also construction materials, right? And then all the others are going to have to do certain things when it comes to proving conformity, basically, right? Proving the compliance, I should say, right? Yeah. Proving compliance, putting a digital passport on every product and so on. And then episode 115 was about, okay, let's say I'm an importer. What should I do? And there's a lot of implications of that if you take that seriously. And really, it's coming into play, 1 or 2 years is going to be here. The final text is not really, is not fully approved yet. However, it's already very well advanced. Yeah. So they're not turning in another direction, right? So that's why we spend time covering it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, a huge impact on product design in particular. I think Clive said it will come into effect for most/all products by, did he say May the 21st, 2024?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So for all products except some food products and a few things. Yeah. But yeah, most consumer and industrial products and construction products, etc., are going to be concerned, within the scope of this new regulation.
Yeah. So if you do import into the EU, folks, that is definitely something to listen to. So go back and check out episodes 110 and 115. We've also written about it on the Sofeast blog too. So yeah, definitely a great topic. Something a little bit different today, though. Regular listeners will remember that we've been doing a mini-series within the pod about doing your own sourcing from China and basically drawing on your experience in order to go through the entire process from starting out and finding suitable suppliers through to, negotiating with them, getting the products made, and then cooperation after you've got that supplier and touching on soft skills like building rapport, improving their quality. And today's topic, which is the final part as well, part 9, is keeping their costs under control. So I'll leave a link to all of the different episodes in this mini-series in the show notes once again. But let's get started with this particular topic. When we talk about our suppliers' costs, I mean, this isn't our factory, so why should we be so interested in this topic?
Well, who doesn't, buy products from a supplier? I mean, so people who listen to us, some of them work at a factory, and, where do they get all the inputs to their production process, right? The materials, the components, the accessories, and so on. Yeah. So they're definitely concerned about their their own suppliers keeping costs under control, because if their suppliers' cost balloon, well, their own internal costs, I mean, the cost of their finished products will also have to balloon. And yeah, there's some cases where 80% of the cost of the finished product is components, right? I mean, if you look at the automotive industry, for example, so you have to be very careful with the costs of the parts that you buy from suppliers, and you need to make sure that over the next 5 years, 10 years, these costs don't go up, at all, or don't go up, too much. Actually, in the auto industry, there's often pressure to find ways to reduce the cost over time, but that's another topic. And if you are an importer, well, if you buy at landed cost, let's say 100, and you sell to your own customers at 125, let's say, well, if that supplier that was selling to you at 100 suddenly goes up 105, 110, 115, 120, I mean, can you raise the price, to your own customers as fast as they raise it on you? Right. That's been a big struggle for a lot of buyers, a lot of importers, and suddenly you have surprises like Trump's tariffs and all kinds of things like that, and the cost of such and such materials going up a lot. Well, then what do you do, right? Obviously, you need to keep your eyes on your suppliers' costs. I guess that's the key idea here.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So basically, it's a workaround to high prices. I guess with a lot of materials and components these days, the prices have been going up, and it's in some cases maybe difficult to avoid some of those cost increases. But what we're talking about here is working with your supplier to find ways to, keep their costs down.
Right. So if you only buy, 1% or 3% of what your supplier makes, you're not going to have a lot of influence over what they decide to do, right? And if they raise the prices on you, it's basically going to go down to, hey, this is what I can pay, no more, take it or leave it, and a sort of strong arm negotiation like that. Now, and we touched on this a little bit earlier in this series, but if you work with suppliers of the right size, at least for some of the key products or components that you need to procure, and you really, it's very, very important that you have some degree of control over what the supplier does. Well, you pick the supplier the right size. Maybe you represent 20%, 30%, 50% of what they make. Well, they're going to pay attention to what you say, right? Yes. And then there's a number of things you can do to help them actually keep their costs under control. Now, I have to say right away, in 90+% of the cases, this is not applicable, all right? They're not going to open up their cost structure, their bill of material and everything to you. They're not going to invite you to come around and listen to everything you say and say, oh yeah, we're going to try that, right? Actually, if you buy from China, it might be 99%, in 99% of cases it's not applicable maybe, right? But this episode is for those cases where you do have a lot of influence, and actually we could say some control over what the factory says and does, and you can push them to do certain things, right? So if they come to you and you say, they say, like every year the salaries go up and blah blah blah, and the material costs go up. So this is the new price. We used to sell it to you for $10. Now it's $11.5 or something. And this is a very big problem for you, and you buy a lot of that product. Well, what should you do? I mean, you can't just accept it, right? So in a lot of cases, the advice would be know the market price, go out there, double source, right? So if supplier A, which maybe is your preferred supplier, prices it, the price themselves out of the market, well then, you go with supplier B, and then you cultivate supplier C because supplier A is out of the picture, right? This is just using sourcing, right, as a tool for cost control. And then you can go back to supplier A and say, well, no, we reject it. Sorry, we're not buying anything for that. And you'll be like, what? Right? Because sometimes they really don't expect that. And you say, no, sorry, if you increase the price, I'm not buying. All I can accept is whatever, 10.4 or something. Because you have an alternative, right? Okay, that's great. But this is not what we're talking about here in this episode. This episode is about the case where maybe you own the manufacturing place. Maybe you own, a controlling stake in it. Maybe you are the biggest customer and they listen to everything you say, right? And maybe it's like the last attempt, to say, okay, do we keep working with these guys, or do we just develop an alternative and get away from them soon, right? And there's cases where it comes down to that. And then what can you do, right? So what we're going to talk about is what can you actually do to help them control their costs.
Okay. And if you do fall into the category where you've got enough sway with your supplier, so you're a large enough customer, and if you followed some of the advice that you gave earlier on in this series about building a good relationship with them, building that rapport, that's going to help open the door to go in and actually make these suggestions to drive these improvements, right?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
And so how to go about that, right? That's the question. And obviously, first you need to think, okay, first, what are their costs, right? What is driving their costs? And sometimes maybe you can go there, maybe you can send a consultant there, walk the shop floor, look around, ask some questions, look at what they buy, in what quantity, and so on and so forth. And you might have some surprises right there. You might say, well, why are there 30 people just right now as I'm walking around, 30 people not doing anything productive because they are reworking something that was done wrong the first time, right? And if you see that, well, the cost of poor quality are probably very high in that factory. And you might first need to work with them to improve the quality system. And we talked about the cost of poor quality before in another episode with Max and with Clive.
Yeah.
And that can be the number one source of cost for the factory, right? So you need to in that case, you need to have them set up a better system, set up the right checkpoints, set up the right tests. Maybe they receive, some glue, and then once in a while the glue is not right, and then whatever they make, maybe the paint brushes that they make, after a few weeks everything goes away, nothing's holding. Well, maybe they need to do certain tests on the glue. What's the viscosity? What's what are such and such parameters that can be tested relatively easily just to confirm that they get a consistent quality of glue, right? Because in a lot of cases, it's not the case at all, because nobody really controls glue amazingly, in China. So either they pay expensive glue from a certain brand, and some of these brands are very good, but very often the factory left to themselves will not pay expensive glue. They will buy, the glue from the local guy who has the low price and so on, and they get horribly inconsistent quality. So this is just an example. So if the cost of poor quality are very high at the factory, you need to work on that. And maybe they have trouble reaching your quality standard. Maybe the quality standard actually needs to be reevaluated. Maybe it's a little bit too high, creates a lot of extra costs. Maybe, right? So you need to go and have a look and understand what's going on. Okay, now let's say it's not quality. What is often creating issues really is probably, I would say, two things. First, on the supply chain side. On the supply chain side, very often they want to make deals. So when they buy whatever, if it's, let's say, leather for their shoes, for example, if they make shoes, they're gonna buy that in large quantity just to get a good deal from the supplier, right? Oh, what about I buy 3 times more? Can you give me another 10% discount? So they get very fixated on the price, but they don't know the cost of anything. So they know the price of everything, but they don't know the cost of anything. Which, by that, what do I mean? They don't understand the cost implications. They don't know the cost implications of what they're doing. So they're buying in large quantity. It sucks up all of their working capital. So maybe they need to borrow. What is the interest rate and so on. They need maybe more warehouse space. Maybe they need to rent more warehouse space to carry all that inventory. And then some of these materials will go bad, and some of them maybe are produced poorly. But if they find out about that maybe 2 months later, is certainly too late to send it back to the source. So that can have a tremendously high impact on cost. And it's all the way through, right? It's not just purchasing. If they plan that way, it's not just purchasing and keeping it in a warehouse. It's also in production. They probably make very large batches, right? Batch and queue. So maybe their lead times are extremely long also, and they're not flexible at all. And sometimes we walk in a factory and we try to estimate, and we say, okay, well, from the materials that come in here to a finished product, there's 2.5 months or 3 months. Now, that might sound crazy, but it's really not uncommon. So, and all of this, of course, brings up a lot of extra costs. And the people who studied a little bit about lean manufacturing will know. There's they call it the 7 types of waste, right? If you overproduce, you keep a lot in inventory, and so on and so forth. This has an impact on cost, but it can be very, very hard to go to a production manager who's been doing that way for 30 years and tell them, what you're doing really sucks. I mean, this is really bad. Because of your organization, or should I say your lack of organization, you keep everything simple. You want to make very large batches, and then everything is slow. You're not flexible, and you have high costs. And the guy's going to look at you and say, huh? What are you talking about? I know what I'm doing. I've been doing it for 30 years or 20 years. And to be fair, maybe all of the other factories that he's visited do the same way or even worse, right? So very hard to open their eyes. But that supply chain production planning, size of batches and calculations of what the economic quantity is and so on, and usually it comes with few changeovers that are done very poorly and take a long time. Well, all of that has an impact on cost. And it makes it very hard for them to actually have a relatively high accuracy when it comes to the shipment schedule. So it also impacts on-time deliveries. And it's really bad for quality, because if they have these massive batches, and I don't know, for example, a factory of fans, they were doing a lot of stamping at a time. So it's very, very fast, right? Mm-hmm. And they would have these mountains of metal parts that they would stamp. And then it would wait for a while, and 2 weeks later, it would go to the next step, and there would be some machining. But if they find a quality issue there, well, they've already stamped 20,000 parts. Mm. What to do about that now? Do we rework? Do we try to kind of squeeze it and hide it, and let's hope that it's not too bad, right? So it's very bad for quality too, and in turn, very bad for quality means very high cost, because they're going to have to rework, and maybe they're going to play a game, and they're going to try to put it into the final product and hope that nobody notices. And if someone notices somewhere, it might become very, very expensive for the manufacturer. So the supply chain setup is very, very important, has a very big impact. But this is extremely hard for an outsider, even a big customer, to change. They kind of have to have an open mind. Okay. Yeah. Usually they will respect you much, much, much more if you come in with some suggestions on manufacturing. And if you say, well, you do it this way, but if you do it that way, you're going to have less scrap, you're going to produce faster, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you're doing die casting, and you have that many quality issues that force you to slow down and force you to do some extra shots and have some scrap and so on. Well, make this and this change on the mold, and do some trials again, and let's make sure you do the right setup and so on, and let's do some new trials, right? And if you show them actually what needs to be changed, what they actually have to do, and they try, and it's true that there's an improvement, hard skills right here. They think, oh, we have a technical expert here. That's great. Let's listen to him, right? Now, this also translates much faster and much more clearly into savings. So if you're making some changes, and they used to have, they used to scrap 8% of the parts, and you have them make some changes, and then they only scrap 3%. Hey, what about the 5% scrap, that used to be processed for nothing, discarded, maybe remelted, or maybe sold for scrap, for nickels on the dollar? What about all the savings from these 5%, parts that used to be bad and now are good? That might be have a massive impact on pricing. But are they going to translate that into a lower price? Now that is a very sensitive discussion, right? Because then if they feel that you're doing that, but you want to reap the benefits right away, maybe even before they are sure that they really have the savings and they will pocket the savings, they will close off. They will say, okay, just let us do it. Like, don't come and bother us, and they will stop sharing information. So very, very dangerous here. But again, if it's a key supplier and you have the ear of the owners, you could strike some kind of deal where maybe you go and help them, or you send consultants, and then whenever there are savings like this that are documented, it's 50%, right? You get 50% in price reduction or rebates or something, and they keep the other 50%. Or maybe they also have the same process for some other customers, and you're going to reap 70% of the savings on your production, And then for the other customers, they're going to reap 100%, right? So there's a number of ways to do that, but you have to keep it simple, and you have to make sure that they feel comfortable with it. Otherwise, they will just keep you out of the loop, and they will not want to play the game. That's a problem.
Yeah, they don't want you to mess with their money. These are quite interesting, because what you're talking about, essentially, these are hidden costs. So if the supplier comes to you and says, sorry, we've got to increase the costs, really we're talking about, well, why is it happening? And just asking them, they might not be very open about these reasons. Maybe they don't exactly know themselves. So as you mentioned, absolutely. Yeah. So getting in there yourself, or sending consultants like us or whoever to really go and get into the details. I can understand why being able to uncover these hidden costs, that is a really good route to, reducing costs that immediately appear to be a bit high and maybe unexpected in many cases.
Right. Yeah, and talking about hidden costs, in a lot of cases, office costs are extremely high. And they are a problem much more than production costs. So I talked about supply chain issues, I talked about manufacturing issues, and then we can talk about office issues. Yeah. When it comes to manufacturing, I don't want to make it sound very simplistic. It can be quite difficult, or it can be, in many cases, basic industrial engineering tools will show you a lot of issues and ways to go at them. And sometimes you just map, the material flows, and then you say, well, okay, why does it start in that building first floor? Then it goes to that other buildings on the third floor, and then it goes down to that other building on the ground floor, and then it goes over there on the fifth floor for packing. This doesn't make any sense, right? And you try to quantify the amount of labor that they waste doing that. So sometimes it's relatively simple, there's a lot of it that cannot really be described on a podcast. You can help them think of the right type of automation, because automation sometimes, even if it's not very expensive, not very complicated, can help both on cost and on quality. And in the end, improving quality reduces costs. Just an example, we've had several projects with toys where the wrong assortment was going into packaging. So, and that is a big problem. You get your box of toys for Christmas, you open it, and then you see that a couple of screws are missing for the train set, or that special whatever card or figurine is wrong or is missing, and the whole party might be really spoiled, right? So, and in some cases, just put together an automated packing machine that would always get the assortment right, as long as it's set up and maintained the right way. It saves some cost on packing, and it prevents a lot of quality issues, right? So that's a relatively simple example, and there can be a lot of other things. A lot of the times, tooling is important. Thinking of the right fixtures, the right jigs, and so on can save a lot of time. And sometimes it's, we talked before about design for manufacturing and assembly, and there's also a lot of savings to be made there if some of these learnings can be fed back into the product design process, right? So all of that, I would say, is about product manufacturing. And then there's office.
Yeah.
And office systems sometimes are more costly than production systems, meaning that in production, at least from a labor point of view, they often tend to run, I should not say lean, they tend to run without a lot of headcount. There's a production manager, and then there's a few supervisors and a few teams with a leader, and they tend to push people, and a lot of the time the waste is rather visible, So in many cases, it doesn't get that bad. However, in the office, well, very often you see, 20 people in the office, 40 people in the office, and they don't have a proper ERP set up the right way. And you already know if they had the right ERP, doing the right things, showing, ensuring that the right data are available to the right people when they need it, making sure that people have the visibility over the data that they need. They don't need to go ask another person and send 5 emails and so on. Making sure that there's controls and alerts when certain things, when there's a risk or when there's a mistake or something. Maybe a purchaser is going to reorder something that is still in inventory, right? So there should be they should have the visibility, they should be able to see it, and also there should be some kind of alert. If that's the case, maybe the purchasing manager should have their attention called to it. It's just an example, but an ERP can help so much, again, to automate some of the tasks, make some of the tasks completely irrelevant, not necessary, and prevent mistakes. So very often what we see in China is that they will say, yeah, we have an ERP. Okay, they have King D or something like that for accounting, and they're kind of forced to do it anyway by the local tax office and so on. But then you start to, okay, so what about, and they will say, oh yeah, look, we have everything. We have the purchases, we have the sales, we have, what we have in inventory. And then you say, okay, but show me the workflow of exactly how people work, and then they all have Excel files everywhere on their computers. They don't really use the ERP as it's supposed to be used. And to go back to supply chain, when you start to ask, okay, so show me the material control and production control, how you do all the planning. Oh, no, that's not in the ERP, right? So most factories in China do not even try to make full use of the ERP. And it's not, sometimes the GM will try and will push, but there's a lot of resistance because number one, people are used to their Excel files and everybody has their own data and everything. And number two, some of the people don't, they have a strong interest in keeping the status quo. If you're a purchasing agent and you're getting some kickbacks on some of the, from some of the suppliers, well, you don't want that kind of transparency that an ERP is going to provide. When people want to know where this kind of screw is purchased, they want to, you want them to ask you, and then you open your Excel file and you say, oh yeah, it's these guys there. You want me to give them a call, blah, 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 and then if you're fired, then they don't even have the record about what happened, or it's not so easy, right? And if you're getting kickbacks from suppliers, that's what you want. But then the minute there's an ERP with all the data properly filled out, it's very easy for someone anywhere to compare the prices that you pay with the prices of some other potential suppliers, right? And you can be challenged very easily, and you can be fired tomorrow, and it will not make a huge difference if you were just pushing paper, just doing purchasing requests that turn into POs and so on. Somebody else can probably do it if it's all in the ERP and there's the history, including quality history, delivery history, and so on about each of the suppliers. Your value as an employee sort of goes down. I mean, you can be replaced much more easily. So people are resistant to that. And then, what is the result? Bloated offices with a lot of people who should not be there if a good process were in place.
Yeah.
But that's the sad reality in a lot of factories. And when you have an excess of 20 office people who are paid more than shop floor operators, it's very expensive. It's very, very expensive.
You're referring quite specifically to China in this particular example, and I get why. When you were in India recently, did you see any evidence that things are different in India when it comes to the administration of the factory?
It very much depends on the factories. I did not look into the details of the ERPs and everything, but I could see in some of them that there were efforts at implementing better management practices, including keeping things simple and making things visual. And all of that goes in the right direction. Indian companies, Indian people also tend to rely more maybe on software. There's so many software developers there, right?
Absolutely.
So they have a lot of choice for all kinds of ERPs. I would guess it's probably better implemented than in China on average, but I'm not sure because salaries are lower. So there's kind of an attitude sometimes that, hey, whatever, just hire a couple of warm bodies and they would push the paper again. Right? So I'm not really sure about that.
Okay.
To summarize here about keeping costs under control, everything I said makes no sense if your supplier is not going to listen to you. So if you have leverage over your supplier and if it makes sense for you to invest some time, send some consultants, then you can look at the supply chain systems, you can look at the manufacturing systems, you can look at the office systems. Supply chain systems can be very difficult to change, and as well as office systems. Manufacturing systems, looking at their processes and the material flow and so on, and making changes there, helping them, do things like, get better tooling, accelerate the changeovers, train the people a little bit better, change the methods that they're using. Okay, all of that can have a very, very fast impact, very good, a fast payback and a good return on investment, and it's very visible. So usually it makes more sense to start there, to establish trust, and to see if there can be a little bit of a momentum to keep going and give them some other improvements to work on, right? So that makes sense. And since we're wrapping up this mini series,
yes,
I think for people who've listened to all the episodes, it has to be a balance. If you want to be a good buyer and reach your objectives, it has to be a balance. It's like tough love, right? It's a paradox, and it's really the same idea here. You need to know what you're doing. You need to show them the limitations. You need to show them your process, and you need to push back on certain things that are not very, reasonable. So you need to know what's reasonable, of course, first. And we covered that, some of that in earlier episodes in that series. And at the same time, you also need to show them at least your key suppliers, right? The few suppliers that are really important to you. You need to show them that you're committed to the relationship. You need to give them some feedback. And if they need, you need to be ready to extend a little bit of help, right? Because that's what elevates your profile, in their eyes. That's what will make them think, okay, this is a good customer. We should not mess up, let's try to do a good job for these guys, right? But of course, if you're extremely tough on price negotiations, they won't really care about that. It has to be a little bit of a partnership. Otherwise, they're really not going to care much, except if your volumes are huge and it makes them really excited. But apart from that, you need to leave them a little bit of margin. You need to show that you're listening to them. You need to show that, hey, maybe, instead of giving them some orders in their peak season, let's give them some orders maybe in their lower season, for example, right? So you might have to borrow some working capital to do that earlier. You might get a slightly lower price, maybe, but if it's not their peak season, it's also in your interest in the sense that there's a lower risk that they subcontract production without telling you. Yeah. There's a lower risk that they are so busy that they bump your order, and they ship to you 3 weeks late. And there's a lower risk that they mess up on quality, because they say, oh yeah, we had to face this big rise in orders, and we had to hire some people. Oh, we are sorry, blah blah blah. New people, they make mistakes, and we had to rush. And you told us to rush, so we run into quality issues. Sort of blaming you for their issues. So going a little bit in the direction of a partnership with some key suppliers includes a lot of communication and being relatively open, and from time to time extending some help. So it's not all about take. It's a little bit about give and a little bit about take.
Yeah, interesting. Well, what a great finish to the series. A great summary, and yeah, I totally understand, totally agree. If anybody listening is wondering, well, okay, I am interested in this topic, I want to get more information, I want to get some help, they can contact us. Just check us out on Sofeast.com, and there's a contact page, and you can get through to Renaud and the rest of the team, and somebody can help you. So if you're wondering how to improve things with your suppliers, or to source, or to manufacture in a more efficient way, all of the topics that are affecting us these days, yeah, absolutely get in touch if you want to go further than this particular mini series of episodes, right?
Sure. Yeah, right. Happy to talk.
Lovely. Okay. Well, so that's it for this particular episode. Back next week with another great one. Thanks, Renaud.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian.
Thanks again for listening to this podcast, brought to you by the Sofeast Group. We're on a mission to provide you with everything you need to manufacture effectively in Asia, including inspections, auditing, new product development support, contract manufacturing, 3PL warehousing and fulfillment, and much, much more across Asia's key manufacturing areas. Visit us at sofeast.com, that's SOFEAST.com, to learn more and get help. If you've enjoyed the podcast today, please do rate, review and share, because it will really help others discover us too.